Good day, everyone, and welcome back to the Happily Never After podcast. This week, we're going to be talking about the things that you wouldn't have done if your spouse hadn't passed away. And that can be thought about in a couple different ways. It's funny, Jay, when we were planning this episode and talking about how we were going to present this to the audience, we both came to the table with completely different perspectives. Where I initially thought about the opportunities that I had for experiences, and you framed it differently. Why don't you tell me a little bit about what you thought when you first heard this topic when I brought it to you?
Definitely. The way I looked at it was looking at all the things that we have done, considering the fact that our spouses have left us. They passed away. I looked at the fact that I talked to you about I cook, and I would not have cooked. I wouldn't have learned how to cook if my wife was alive. She was an incredible chef, you
Mm.
know, so I didn't have to, but I was forced to learn how to do it because I have children and I have needs. I want to eat. So, you
Eating
know, it's
created.
like, and that was a forced change that caused me to elevate my game, caused me
Mm.
to look at things differently.
It
You
was like
know,
a level up.
it really is. And that's one thing that a lot of people that are going through grief, they need to understand. They have to understand that they are going to change.
Mm.
Circumstances will create that change. Remember, you used to be in a partnership. One party handled so many aspects, you handled the other aspects.
It was a give and take.
It really was. Now that you are solo in this entire ordeal, you have to take on 100% of the responsibilities. That
Mm.
creates a change. That creates a mental shift that you have to make because you can shut down, but then that means that those things that are supposed to be done will not be done. And if they're not done, that creates a whole new arena of grief. But you know what? Talk about all the things that you wanted to do, because that's a whole nother part of it that really grows a person.
Yeah, it's so interesting to me that we had very diametrically opposed takes on this topic when it was first presented, and we didn't know that until we came together just before this episode, trying to plan and figure out how this was going to land. And as I'm listening to you talk now, two of things that Craig used to say, his catchphrases, if you will, come to mind. First of all, he would say, choosing nothing is still a choice,
Yes.
subject to the consequences of which. And that just it resonates with me as I'm listening to you talk because I hear his big booming voice in my ear talking to my son when he was choosing not to follow the rules, and Craig would remind him that choosing nothing is still a
A
choice.
choice.
And
That's right.
we, as members of the widowhood community, as grievers, co-commiserators, we have to choose sometimes to continue to put one foot in front of the other. You could have chosen to hire a cook and put yourself in financial destitution. You could have chosen to done meal subscription services or to force your daughters to learn how to cook because they were young adults, they were, adolescents, and you could have offloaded that on them. You
Right.
could have chose
Right.
nothing. The second thing that Craig used to say that really resonated with me is that the easy way is hardly ever the right way.
Mhm.
And man wise beyond his years, even though he was 20 years my senior, wise beyond his years, because he would say that so much so that I would roll my eyes and mock him and pantomime it. He would start saying it, and I would be like, me, 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 me. Like, it was very Charlie Brown teacher, if you will. But it's true, again, like to your point, that we can choose to do nothing or we can choose to do something. And usually that choice is a difficult choice, whether the physical activity itself is outside of our wheelhouse and it's a new skill we have to develop, whether it causes grief and we have to work through that and gain momentum in that skill set, or whether it be that it's an anger that we don't want to do it and we shouldn't have to do it because they're not here. It is not an easy experience, even, 3 years out for me, several years out for you, 10 years out for other people, 6 months out. There is no point where it gets easier. And I don't mean to say that to discourage people, but the cold hard fact is that this is a whole horse of a different color. And I
Absolutely.
just want to remind people that difficult does not mean bad. So,
And you know what? On top of that, what's interesting is you are every time you decide to do something that is not part of your norm, you are growing.
mm,
Les Les Brown said this. It was interesting because you just talked about the whole easy hard thing. Les Brown said the harder the road, the easier your life becomes. The easier road means the harder your life will become.
mm.
And
Him and Craig must have been friends.
what's interesting about it is it is so true because when you decide to address the challenges, what is happening? You are adapting,
Mm,
you are learning the process. And eventually, down the line, this becomes upon osmosis. You know what
mm,
to do. When you shun away from the things that you're supposed to do, then it will eventually become an insurmountable circumstance because you also will not have the skills to traverse whatever is presently in the way. It's
mm.
now like a wall you cannot climb because you don't have the capacity to do it. But because you went through the difficult challenges of learning how to do the process, now the wall is scalable because over time, you've picked up the skills to be able to learn how to get over that wall.
Beautifully said. Grief
It's
is muscle, right?
it is a muscle,
And
seriously.
we have to continually stretch it and practice it and use it and work with it and then tend to it when it's sore. Grief is a muscle that we have to learn to exercise and help rest. I stammered a bit there because I was a loss for words because you were preaching from the pulpit there, and that was good stuff. So put a stamp in that. But to your question, when I think about the things that I'm doing because Craig is gone, I know I've referenced it in previous episodes and certainly in other conversations with people where I always say, that ass Jack Dawsoned me, where it's the Titanic reference, or Rose and Jack are on the door, which there was plenty of room for both of them. Fight me. If you know, you know. And he's telling her that she's going to grow old and die an old lady warm in her bed, and she's going to go on and she's going to do all the things. And at the end of the movie, what do you see? The credits roll, and there's all
Right.
the still photographs of all the things they talked about doing together, but she did them anyway. And to a degree, it's some of that where, for me, it was the trip to Paris that I took for my birthday. And it was learning to reboot the router and install, the new Wi-Fi signal expander and do all those various things that were his job. But beyond that, it was the things that I wouldn't have otherwise had exposure or opportunity to. I could have lived the rest of my life never having ridden a motorcycle, and I probably would have been like, oh, well, I always wanted to do that, but I wouldn't have really regretted it, even though it was something I wanted. Well, grief kind of motivated me, and I don't want to say to live recklessly, but to throw caution to the wind a little bit. And I now very much enjoy riding motorcycles. Probably wouldn't, have pierced my nose. I've got a skydiving adventure booked for later on. And he was a big fan of saying only two things fall out of the sky, bird shit and idiots. So, and I'm neither of those, I'd like to think, but it's that, I don't want to say careless. What's the word? It's just a little bit more joie de vie, like that joy for life and being open to experiences and seeking new experiences. Like I would have been perfectly content living in the bubble of my life, my world with Craig and our kids and our white picket fence and having the retail job that I had. But I don't have that anymore because it burned to the friggin' ground.
Right.
So
Right.
now the laws of physics do not apply. And once you start to understand that the laws of physics do not apply to your life when you've entered widowhood, the sky's the limit for real. Like you can do literally anything. Nothing is too big, nothing is too crazy, nothing is outlandish, unreasonable, unreachable, because you already have the benchmark on being, the crazy friend. I'm
Right.
fine just leaning into that job title a little bit more. So now I've already crossed off 3 bucket list things that prior to Craig's death, I was just sure were pipe dreams. Now they're like things that I've actually turned into goals. And I don't remember where the quote came from, but it's one of my favorites. They say that a goal is just a dream with a plan. And that never really resonated with me until now, where I'm like, yeah, I've had all these dreams and I called them goals, but I never had actionable things
Right.
in line for those to become real. Now I go, sure, I'll go rock climbing. How do I make that happen? What's step number 1? What's step number 2? Sure, I'll go, and ride the motorcycle. How do I do that? Or what do I need to do? And now it's like, sure, I'll host a first of its kind professional development conference in Connecticut. Sure, I'll co-author a book with people from across the country. Sure, I'll be interviewed on the radio and apply to do a TED talk and all of these things that people go, oh, that's so inspiring. I'm like, nah, the opportunity just kind of presented itself and it seemed like a good idea. And I felt strongly about its outcome and it was being open to those opportunities I wouldn't have otherwise had.
That's what it comes down to. Learning to become open
Mm.
to the opportunity. You see, most people who are dealing in grief, their thought process is making the attempt to bring back what the world was before the grief ever happened. And
Well,
that right there is just absolutely impossible. You must make the decision to move forward. And whatever that means is whatever it means. You might make the decision to want to do something like you said, pierce your nose, drive the motorcycle, you know, do the do the grief council, do these things. You have to learn that you're not the same person anymore. You may have similar characteristics, but you now have to raise your game. And I know that it hurts. I know it's a challenge, but challenge, hurt, difficulties, those are all part of growth. I was just on a podcast with a lady named Faith, and I used a butterfly analogy. The simple butterfly analogy. Listen, when the caterpillar is crawling around, its only defenses are hope. I hope
Mm.
I don't get eaten that day, and then eventually it climbs up a tree and it forms a cocoon, a protective shell. Within that shell, within the chrysalis portion, it is literally during the gestation period, it's eating itself because in order to release the platelets to do things like have wings and legs, it has to dissolve itself of the old caterpillar enzymes. And
Mm.
those enzymes end up becoming the nutrients to aid the butterfly or to aid the caterpillar to become the butterfly. And once that happens, that's a transformation. And then the butterfly must now fight to get out of the chrysalis.
Mhm.
During that fight, there is another circumstance that happens. The butterfly's wings, in order for it to strengthen, there are remnants of the old circumstance where they had some, where the caterpillar, you know, had dissolved. Now, those things grow, those enzymes grow to help strengthen the wings. And the butterfly, the fight that the butterfly has to come out of the chrysalis, that's part of the transformation, the
Mm.
pain, the difficulty, the hardships. But once it comes out, is a beautifully painted butterfly that has the capability to fly. You have to go through a challenging period in order for you to become a different version of yourself.
That's so fascinating. And I love the beauty of that example and that metaphor. And it reminds me of a conversation I was having with Professor Dave Roberts recently from Utica University, who will also be one of the speakers at my conference besides yourself. Shout out to Dave Roberts. We were talking, and he was telling me about the post traumatic growth theory. And it is this pivotal moment where you reach a fork in the road and you either develop post traumatic stress disorder following a grief experience, or you have the opportunity for post traumatic growth transformation. And it is the reason, the fact that because of a catastrophic event that is usually grief related, we have this evolution of ourselves, this rise to a higher version where the pieces that no longer serve us fall away and we level up, if you will. And so, what you're saying, that butterfly mentality and that butterfly metaphor is very much of that. We have to level up, and it's, you got to go through it to grow through it. And I hate to keep throwing these like platitudes and bumper stickers at our listeners. I don't mean to, I swear, but they are rooted in truth for a reason,
Yeah.
because they mean something and they came from places where it resonated with people. And I'll throw another Craigism at you. He always used to say that if nothing changes, then nothing
Nothing
changes.
changes. And he
Again,
was so right.
a wise man. He had all these great, I'm like, man, I'm gonna put that on a t-shirt.
And, but he was absolutely right. See, we can make the choice to stay anchored to a circumstance. Like I said, it's the attempt to recreate a past that cannot be recreated.
You've gone through a door that shuts behind you, and it is a
Absolutely.
very specific shaped hole that the only thing that can fill that hole no longer exists.
Yep. Yep.
I'm curious. I want to pivot just slightly. Now, having shared our initial philosophies on the topic that we brought to the table today, I'd love to hear the opposite. So for you, maybe tell me what are some of the things that you got to do or chose to do that you wouldn't have otherwise had opportunity to do since Kim's passing.
Well, let me tell you, it's interesting. You talked about taking the trip to Paris. Let me tell you about my daughter. She did a study abroad, and she ended up going to Ireland,
Mm.
during college. She sends me a plane ticket, and she's like, "Dad, I know your mom always wanted to travel.
Mm.
You know, listen, I've got a total trip booked." She was like, "You're gonna fly to Ireland. 2 days we're gonna go to France. We're gonna hang out in Paris.
Ugh,
Then we're
beautiful.
gonna hang out in Amsterdam." Now let me explain something.
Amsterdam. Whoa.
Yep. She's 21 at this point. So now to the audience, me and my wife used to smoke some weed, that was our thing. And it was interesting was that my daughter was like, "Look, Dad, we're going to Amsterdam." And I smoke. I was like, "Really?" So I'm sitting there. So she's like,
Did you know that about her before this trip?
"No, I didn't know." And I'm figuring me and Kim had kind of kept that
Well,
part
you
of
do
our
the due
world
diligence of a
hidden.
parent, right? Like, with the wine juice, like, or
Right,
the wine cup. This is mommy's juice. Like,
right, right. But you know what? We had first off, we had an awesome experience, because and it wasn't just us, having that time in Amsterdam. We got to spend time doing things. Yes, my wife would have loved going to Paris. She would have loved going to Amsterdam. She would have loved hanging out in Ireland. You know, I wish I had the opportunity to share that experience with her. But you know what? I actually had an incredible time
hmm.
with my daughter, and I got to share that experience with her.
Because
And
even
it's
if Kim had been alive and you and your daughter and Kim had gone, it wouldn't have been the same experience. Like,
no,
this was a
no,
completely different time for you to bond with her and get to know her as an adult in a
yes,
way that you wouldn't have otherwise had access to. So, I said the same thing about Craig when I went to Paris because that was the trip we were supposed to take together. And I, was a little bittersweet. I wanted that to have been that trip, but I also understand as excited and proud and titillated as he would have been to watch me be immersed in my mother country, he it wouldn't have been the same trip because he had already been there and I would have been seeing it through his eyes versus seeing it through my own eyes. So it had to happen the way it did in order for me to have the trip that I did. Not to say it would have been a bad trip with Craig, but it would have been a very
different one.
different trip.
Yeah. I mean, listen, the reality is when you are now doing things on your own, so to speak, you are you are the chief cook and bottle washer, and you are also the chief decision maker.
Mm, I need a
So,
adultier adult.
hey, I
Anybody
mean,
looking to be in charge of me or my life? Because I would love to outsource that.
but it's interesting because, see, you wouldn't be happy that way
No.
because because now that you've had this taste of freedom, so to speak, not that Craig was holding you down, but it was the widowhood places us in the experience where we get the opportunity to expand. Taking the butterfly analogy, our wings are growing. And now we're starting to see things that we probably wouldn't have looked at. Like you
Mm,
said, the trip you took to Paris, taking it alone and taking it with Craig, you probably would not have known the difference except for the fact that you had a different take. Same thing with my trip to Europe. I
it's a
mean,
vantage point. Yeah.
a different vantage point. I remember when I got on the plane and I was like, oh my God, I am traveling outside of this country and I'm going to hang out with my kid, and like, so now we're hanging out in Ireland, had a great time. Ireland, I I tell the audience right now, go to Ireland. Ireland is fun. I mean, it's
No
like
endorsement from the Board of
right,
Tourism from
right.
Ireland at
No,
all.
no endorsement, but still no, Ireland is fun. I'm not gonna lie, you know. And I mean, Paris and Amsterdam were fun too. But the point that I'm making is I had a chance to experience things that I probably never would have gave myself the opportunity to do.
Right.
It's like, or if I did, it would be an experience based off of both me and Kim,
Mm.
and not a bad experience because, like I
Sure,
said,
no,
I
but
would have,
as a spouse,
yeah, you
in a
know,
loving marriage, we tend to prioritize our loved one over ourselves. So the experience would have been skewed, for lack of a better term.
it would have been a group circumstance.
Yes.
And even though my situation was with my daughter, and yeah, it was, but remember, she was in college, she was abroad. So she had friends, she had a whole life out there, you know, but she also wanted to make sure that daddy had a good time.
I love that.
So, and of course the drinking age was like 16. And
That's
I
wild.
now let me tell you something, I don't drink at all, except when I was out there, man, I got hammered. First off, let me
You went
explain something.
Instagram style.
Yo, first off, there was no way. I used to when I was a drinker, Guinness was like my favorite beer. So I was like, there's no way I'm gonna go to Ireland
And not
and
have a
not
Guinness.
go to the Guinness factory. No way. You
Did
know,
it taste different there than it does over here? Was it different?
yes, yes. And because first off, it is fresh and it's not shipped. You
I
know what
found
I'm
the same
saying?
thing when I went to Paris. My favorite wine is a French wine, and over there, it's just such a different taste and experience. And even like their McDonald's food over there tastes different. Like it's wild.
Well, you know what? We ate at the restaurant of the Louvre, and
Oh, that's a good one.
I had snails for the first time ever. They were
Escargot.
they were so good. And it was just like, I'm sitting there again, experiences I never would have had. The smoke shop we went to. Let me tell you, there was a picture of Willie Nelson. There was a picture of Snoop Dogg.
Oh, geez. It's like a Hall of
There was a
Fame.
there was a picture of Cypress Hill. And I'm sitting there and I'm like, all these people hung out here. And all we did was smoke joints and play checkers, because they had a checkerboard out there. And it was just like, again, and a block later, they had a sweet shop. Man, I
Oh
went in
boy.
there like I was like a kid in a
You
candy store.
murdered
It was
that.
crazy, but the
Some
point that
IKEA cinnamon buns up in there.
they had everything.
That's
And
funny.
Lord, let me explain something. My credit card was on fire. I
Oh
mean,
boy.
but you know what? That was one of the experiences that I could not shortchange myself
Mm.
because I
So
had
once in a
to,
lifetime. It really is.
yeah,
Like people ask me about my trip to Paris. I'm like, that was a bucket list trip.
yes,
I didn't even know it was a bucket list trip, but coming home, I'm putting it on the bucket list retroactively. Like it went,
Abs-
put it on the list and then crossed it out immediately because it's already been done. I would totally go back to Paris. I came home from that trip and I called my financial advisor and I was like, Zach, we're retiring in Paris, hopefully at age 50. And he was like, okay, I'll make a note.
Well, you know what? That's the way I felt about Ireland. It was like, you know, I'm definitely going back
Yeah.
because
Well, we should
it
get a widowhood community Europe trip together. Anybody out
uh,
there listening, throw it in the comments, send us a message. Let's go on tour or something. Like,
right,
take
right.
this show on the road.
Let's go take the show on the road. You know,
Maybe that's in our future plans because that's a thing we wouldn't have otherwise had access to had our spouses not died, right? Like us meeting, that wouldn't have happened.
right.
Uh, but
And
to your
that's
point and your experience, the polar opposite for me, I'm sitting here and I'm trying to think about the things not forced to do. One, because I don't like to think of anything that I do as a force because it's always a choice, even if you choose nothing. And two, I think we kind of covered like those had to evolves, but the things that I have come across where I've had to evolve a little bit, you talk about that um those experiences and exposures we wouldn't have otherwise had. And so I was a single mom living with my parents on welfare when I met Craig, and he reached down and plucked me out of poverty. And then we had this beautiful home together. And then after he passed, I moved my parents into my new space because I had to move. And it wasn't until just recently that I'm the only adult in the house. And I had never done that before. And I think about it now. I'm like, it's going to be a long time before I ever live on my own because I have children at home. But I've never been an adult living on their own. Like, I've never been the only responsible adult. I went from living at my parents' house to living with a boyfriend to living at my parents' house to living with my husband to living with my parents. You see a trend here. 3 times you're
right.
out. 3 strikes you're out. We will not do that again. Let me make that very clear. I learned my lesson the third time. But I had never been the sole head of household,
Right.
primary keeper of the things. And Craig and I had a great relationship where he was software, I was hardware, right? He installed the internet router and did the taxes and managed the bank accounts. And I wrote the checks he told me to and did the grocery shopping and clipped the coupons and installed the garbage disposal and bought the blades for the lawnmower. And he mowed the lawn and did the laundry and I did the dishes. Like we had a good balance of who did what, but there was that sharing of responsibilities. And to a degree, I let him take care of me in a way,
Right.
which was his honor, his pleasure, and I very much enjoyed it. And there was no awareness of it until now. But to have to go and be the adult and the only adult and
Right.
the most responsible adult, I'm like, wait a minute, you guys are leaving me in charge? I need an adultier adult
Well, you
at
know what?
5 years old with 2 kids. And I'm like, oh, okay, I am a grown up. And it was a very surreal understanding and radical acceptance that I had never been the only adult in a household before.
Well, you know what, Kate? What's interesting is, sure, I had many experiences of living on my own, but when I married Kim, we were 17 years into a relationship when she died.
Mm,
I was used to that routine that we had. And the minute she got sick and entered the hospital, that routine absolutely changed. I
mm,
remember one day we had a dog, and I'm walking the dog. Now, this dog was Kim's. Now, it was our family dog, but this dog was Kim's. And I remember I'm walking the dog, it's probably maybe the third, fourth day, and the dog just stops on the corner of our house and just sits down and starts looking at me, kind of like, yo, man, there's something wrong here.
Mm.
Mommy usually takes me. Dude, this is like the third or fourth time you've taken me out.
It's
I
like, who
had
are
to,
you and where's my mom?
I had to sit on the curb with him, and
Mm.
I had to explain to him, mommy's not coming home, bro. And I was like, this is now my responsibility. This is now something that me and you are doing, you know. And when you talked about you don't like to use the word forced, and I understand that. But I knew that if that dog didn't get walked, he was going to take a crap in my house. I knew that I couldn't starve the dog. You know, I knew that I had to water, give him water. I had to do these things. You know, this dog became a part of me.
Mm.
You know, as quickly as Kim left my world, this dog entered my world. Not like I didn't never fed him or never walked him before,
Sure, but it
but
was
it,
different
it
before.
was different. And it was a one-off when I would do them because that was Kim's thing.
Right.
But
Between work and the kids and
right.
whoever else was home first. And it was the relationship that Kim had with the dog. Yep, I get that.
And I mean, I remember after I never would let this dog sleep on the bed. Never. But when Kim died,
Yep.
when Kim died,
Same situation at my house. Layla
he
sleeps on the bed now.
he used to sit at the head of the bed. And I remember one night I was just like, come on, man, come up here. And
Mm.
and ever since then, that was his spot. It was Kim's spot, you
Yep.
know? And it was just like all these things, you have to make a change. A lot of it comes with a change in your mindset,
And
you
some of it
know?
happens without you even realizing
Yeah,
as you're
absolutely.
going through it and dealing with it and processing things and surviving in the beginning, which then evolves into thriving if you choose. Some of those changes and what have you are organic and subconscious and by happenstance, and others are choices.
Absolutely.
Is there anything on your horizon and on your purview that you wouldn't have otherwise had access to, but is now a possibility?
You know, just just podcasting and live streaming right now are a couple of things that I see. Um, I realized that as much as I love Kim, she would not have really been okay with this world because right now this world is not giving the money that it needs to give. It's
Mm.
this is more of a hobby, more of a labor of love that will eventually morph into something.
Sweat
And
equity.
it is sweat equity right now. And it's not like she'd been mad at me, but this would have been considered a hobby to her.
Mm.
Where for me, I am looking at this to make this into a more steady circumstance. There's meaning to this.
Mm.
I feel that there are people that need to hear what we're saying because we're going we're having the chance to walk through this new normal that other people what all other people will go through. If you're married and your spouse dies, you're going to go through this somehow, some way. You
Yep.
can make the choice. like you said earlier, you can make the choice to resist, but that becomes futile
Mm,
because at some point, at some point, life doesn't care about your resistance. Life's going to go on. You can stay put, but just like Craig said, even not making the decision is a decision.
you
And
ain't said nothing but a thing.
over time, you have to learn how to move in order to be able to progress, in order to grow. That that is again, like we talked about the growth of butterfly. It's not pretty. Look, man, the butterfly eats itself at some point, you know, and but or the caterpillar, I should say. But either way it goes, in order for it to morph into becoming a butterfly, it has to go through those very difficult times, the darkness, because it's not pretty inside the chrysalis. You
It's so
know,
not pretty in
there's
here.
there's not light, and we don't have light. We don't see light right now sometimes. People in grief, especially when they've lost their spouse, they don't see the darkness. They don't see that the tunnel will eventually open up into daylight. They have tunnel vision that's full of darkness.
Mm.
And a lot of the times, maybe it's, you know, based off of a lot of things, what people may say, their perceptions of themselves. Some people feel like without their spouse, they don't know how to live.
And that's true, I think, to a degree in the beginning. I certainly asked aloud and to Craig and, both his dead body and his spirit, what the F am I supposed to do
Yep.
now?
Yep.
Because I didn't know which direction was up, and I felt like I was consistently being waterboarded with gasoline. It is so
It
disorienting and suffocating and overburdensome at sometimes. But
was absolutely crazy.
to throw one more bumper sticker at you, the brightest of diamonds are shaped under the greatest amount of pressure.
Pressure. That's true. Now, let me tell you one thing that I could not believe I did,
Mm.
which was so awesome.
Besides going to Amsterdam.
Yes, this, my wife used to love comedy. Oh, she used to love going to comedy shows. She used to love, funny movies, everything. She had this infectious laugh. So one day I got this crazy idea of going to an impromptu place and doing some comedy.
Okay.
So it was incredible because I had an awesome experience. And I'm a pretty funny guy, you know, but I'm not a comedian, but I was funny, you know. And I got into the car and just seriously just cried because I
Mm.
I know Kim would have cracked up
It was
because
cathartic for you.
yeah, because I'm not that guy. Like I like comedies,
You could be that guy.
but you know what? It's interesting because that was an exploratory phase of my life. I
That's part of the post loss, I feel like.
Yes, it
You
is.
try new things. You have to try the escargot and
Right.
do the stand up and ride the motorcycle and go to Paris. And obviously within financial reason. In no way, shape, or form am I suggesting that anyone put themselves, in destitution or
No.
financial hardship. Certainly don't take a second mortgage on your house to go
Right,
experiment
right.
figuring out who you are. There are economical ways of doing this, people. I learned that mistake the hard way. Um, but buying a home for myself, that was a thing I never would have thought would be a thing. And I was perfectly content having lived in or living in the house that Craig and I picked out together.
Right.
And I think I've mentioned before that my name wasn't on the house. Um, so didn't I didn't technically own it. We
Right.
shopped for the houses together. I went to the closing. I was with him when he signed all the paperwork. We were married. Ipso facto, it was my
Right.
house.
Right. By default, it was you.
It was our home. But legally speaking, it was not mine. And to have grown up my entire life in apartments and dealing with moving 100 times and eviction notices and housing and all that stuff, to now have purchased a property by myself on my own, to
Right.
not only do that, but to qualify for it, to navigate the finding a realtor, picking out the house I like that I need without anybody else. It was solely me. It was just me. And I included my children in it because I thought that that was fair given the trauma they'd been through. But
Sure.
I was the veto power. I was the sole decision maker. And what a healing of generational trauma that was that I wasn't expecting, to be gifted by Craig in his death, the gift of home ownership.
You know what? Here's what's interesting. You and I have an opposite effect. I I I grew up in apartments, of course, and we purchased our home. And when we bought that home, you know, man, a lot of things came with it. And I'm cutting lawns, I'm doing this, after a while, when Kim died, I think that she released me from
Mm.
a burden. Uh, Not that I didn't love my house, I absolutely loved it, but she also knew that, like, doing stuff like cutting the lawn and this and that and painting
Houses
stuff
require
and
maintenance.
you know and all that maintenance was interesting and trying. And then the fact that we bought our house across the street from my mother-in-law and
Uh,
just added to the whole thing.
1-2 punch. Yeah. So to
But
be able to go back to apartment living
yep,
alleviated some of that obligation and responsibility of homeownership from you, which allowed you the time and
absolutely,
space to
absolutely.
heal, grieve the way that you needed. Where for
And
me, the gift of homeownership was a healing for me.
yes,
So
and
it's interesting the things that we're presented with and how many similarities we have, but also clear the differences are in those
but
similarities.
that's what's interesting is that's the circumstance of a person in grief. It doesn't matter what your original situation is. It can, you can stay where you are. You could shift to another house, or you can shift to a townhouse, condo, apartment, whatever it is. You're starting a new venture. You're starting a new chapter of your life. And
You're turning the page,
you
if you will.
literally, that's what's happening. And home, obviously, listen, home ownership or living, we should say, that's part of
So,
Maslow's hierarchy of needs, man. You know,
yep.
you you need you need shelter, you know,
But
and
that could
it's
be staying where you are, like you said. And some people will do renovations and make it all their own, or finish the project, or move, or rent it out, or what have you.
it's Kate, listen, this has been an incredible conversation because seriously, the way we're looking at it, like you said in the beginning, you had one thought process about these things. You know, I had another, but once we brought them both together, it showed that we were both kind of able to understand each other because we both had many of the same circumstances, even in slightly different arenas. You know,
Mm,
y- look, we both had a chance to look at things that are totally different. Like you said, you ride the motorcycle, you wanting to skydive. Listen, me wanting to, you know, go do improv.
mm.
It's like, wow, you know, you having to take certain responsibilities on, me doing the same, you know,
And then
us,
releasing on other responsibilities.
right. And and then recognizing that there are certain things that we would have loved to have our spouses with us, but we learned that doing these things on our own gave us a certain understanding, a certain sense of purpose. Look, I can go all day, but
You know, I could too, my friend. I think this has been my favorite talk that we've had so far. And I am looking forward to many more talks with you. But we have reached the end of our time here. So, for all of our listeners out there, I just want to thank everyone for continuing to tune in and remind everyone that they can find us on their favorite streaming platform. And stay tuned for future episodes of Happily Never After.
hey, listen, have a good one, everybody. Thank you so much.
You've been listening to Happily Never After, part of the Xvadio Podcast Network. You can catch every episode of Happily Never After, as well as the rest of the network, at xvadio.com, the Apple Podcasts app, Google Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Audible, Amazon Music, and wherever you find podcasts.